The sea was conquered, but it demanded everything in return. For centuries, we've told tales of naval glory, of cannons roaring and empires rising. We celebrate the victors, the admirals who commanded fleets and claimed the oceans for their kings. But history is more than just a record of triumphs. It is also a ledger of loss. What happens after the cannons fall silent? What is the true cost of supremacy? This is the story of the Anglo-Dutch Wars, a conflict that defined an era of maritime power. But we won't focus on the victors. We'll uncover the hidden price paid in blood, ruin, and sorrow, the price of the seas. In the mid-17th century, two nations, England and the Dutch Republic, stood as titans of trade. Their ships crisscrossed the globe, carrying silks, spices, and the promise of unimaginable wealth. The ocean was their shared marketplace, a highway to prosperity, but this shared ambition soon soured into bitter rivalry. Both saw control of the seas not just as a path to riches, but as a matter of national survival. The stage was set for a series of brutal conflicts that would bleed both nations dry. The fight was not just for territory, but for the very soul of global commerce. The First Anglo-Dutch War erupted in 1652. It wasn't a war of kings or ideologies, but a war of merchants and sailors, fought over trade routes and economic dominance. England, under its new Commonwealth, passed the Navigation Acts, a direct challenge to Dutch maritime supremacy. These acts demanded that goods imported to England be carried only by English ships. For the Dutch, whose economy was built on being the world's carriers, this was a declaration of economic war. The first cannon shots were almost an afterthought. The real battle had already begun in the counting houses and on the docks. Fleets clashed in the English Channel and the North Sea, but the real prize was control over the arteries of global trade. When the smoke cleared from the great naval battles, the true cost began to surface. Imagine the scene: shattered warships drifting aimlessly, their masts snapped like twigs. The water, once a symbol of life and commerce, was now a silent graveyard littered with debris and the ghosts of fallen sailors. On the decks of the surviving ships, the reality was grim. Wounded men were carried below into cramped, dark spaces that served as makeshift infirmaries. Surgeons worked with crude tools, their efforts often futile against the horrific injuries inflicted by cannonballs and splinters. Comrades mourned the friends they had lost, their exhaustion etched onto their faces. The cheers of victory were hollow, drowned out by the quiet agony of survival. For every ship that limped back to port, another was lost forever to the depths, taking its entire crew with it. Back home, the war's reach extended far beyond the battlefield. In the ports of Amsterdam and London, families gathered at the docks, their eyes scanning the horizon for a familiar sail. But for too many, the wait was in vain. The news of a lost ship spread like a plague through coastal communities, leaving behind a trail of widows and orphans. The once bustling harbors grew quiet. The shipyards fell idle. These were communities built around the sea, and when the sea became a war zone, their very existence was threatened. The human cost wasn't just measured in the sailors who never returned, but in the silent grief that settled over entire towns, a constant, painful reminder of the price being paid far out on the waves. The economic devastation was just as profound. The wars were a systematic dismantling of the very prosperity both nations fought to protect. Merchant fleets, the lifeblood of England and the Dutch Republic, were either destroyed in battle or seized by enemy privateers. Once thriving trade routes became perilous gauntlets. The flow of goods from Asia and the Americas slowed to a trickle. Warehouses that once overflowed with spices, textiles, and colonial goods now stood empty and silent. In cities across Europe, the absence of Dutch and English cargo ships created widespread shortages, prices soared, markets closed. The engine of 17th century commerce had sputtered, choked by the relentless conflict it had fueled. This economic collapse sent shock waves through every level of society. Governments on both sides were pushed to the brink of bankruptcy. Building, arming, and manning massive fleets was an astronomically expensive endeavor. To fund this endless war, taxes were raised again and again, placing an unbearable burden on the general population. Public unrest simmered. In the quiet of a candlelit room, merchants and government officials would tally their accounts, the red ink spreading across the ledgers like a stain. Each entry represented another lost ship, another failed voyage, another step toward financial ruin. The pursuit of naval supremacy was draining the national treasuries, turning the promise of wealth into a mountain of debt. Politically, the immense pressure of the wars reshaped national strategy. Decisions were no longer made just by admirals at sea, but by desperate politicians facing empty coffers and angry citizens. The Second and Third Anglo-Dutch Wars saw shifting alliances and surprising political maneuvers, all driven by economic necessity. At times, one side would sue for peace not because it was defeated at sea, but because it could no longer afford to fight. The wars revealed a crucial truth: naval power was inseparable from economic health. A nation could win every battle, but if it bankrupted itself in the process, the victory was meaningless. It was a brutal lesson in the limits of military might. So, who truly won the Anglo-Dutch Wars? In the short term, England appeared to gain an edge, solidifying its naval power and chipping away at Dutch commercial dominance. But this victory was a Pyrrhic one. The cost had been staggering for both sides. The Dutch Republic, though weakened, remained a major economic force for decades. England, while on its way to building a global empire, had paid a heavy price in blood and treasure. Perhaps the only real winner was the war itself, a relentless machine that consumed men, ships, and wealth without distinction. The idea of a clear victor fades when you look at the shared devastation. Supremacy was achieved, but at a cost few could afford. As we look back, the image that remains is not one of glorious fleets locked in combat. It is a quiet, somber sea at sunset. The water is calm now, but it holds the memory of conflict. Wreckage dots the horizon, the skeletal remains of ambition. The wars taught a painful lesson that the oceans cannot be conquered, only borrowed. The price for that loan is paid in generations of loss, in empty harbors and grieving families. The quest for supremacy on the seas was a story written not just in glory, but in ruin. It is a reminder that the true measure of history is found not in the triumphs we celebrate, but in the costs we choose to forget. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the past. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into history. We'll see you next time.